I trusted my son, and he broke me forever the day my own son abandoned me. They thought throwing me away would end my story. They were wrong. I gave him everything, and he gave me nothing. Some betrayals don't just leave you homeless. They break your heart. My son used my savings to buy a house and left me alone. Trust a child too much. And this can happen at 72. I was told I was no longer welcome in my own home. Karma comes. And he finally saw what he lost. A mother's love is priceless. And he paid the price too late. I trusted my son with everything I had. My home, my savings, my dignity. And the day I needed him the most, he showed me how disposable a mother can be. My name is Margaret Wilson, and I am 72 years old. For most of my life, I believed I had done everything right. I raised my only son, Daniel, with love, patience, and sacrifice. I was a widow by 48, working double shifts as a school cafeteria assistant just to make sure Daniel never felt the emptiness I carried after his father passed away. I skipped vacations. I wore the same coat for 10 winters. I smiled through exhaustion because my son's future mattered more than my comfort. Daniel grew up smart, polite, and ambitious. Teachers praised him. Neighbors admired him. When he graduated college, I cried harder than the day I buried my husband. I truly believed my sacrifices had been worth it. Mom, he used to say, "One day I'll take care of you the way you took care of me." I held those words close to my heart. By the time Daniel married Rebecca, I was already slowing down. My hands shook when I poured tea. Stairs felt steeper. Silence felt heavier. Still, I lived alone in the small house my husband and I bought decades ago. It wasn't fancy, but it was filled with memories: birthday candles, scraped knees, late-night homework sessions at the kitchen table. Then one afternoon, Daniel came over with a serious look on his face. "Mom," he said gently, "this house is too much for you now. Taxes, repairs. It's stressful. Why don't you put it in my name? I'll handle everything. You'll always have a place with us." I hesitated, not because I didn't trust him, but because a mother's heart always feels fear when letting go. Rebecca smiled and squeezed my hand. "We're family now, Mom, you deserve peace." I signed the papers 2 weeks later. I told myself this was what love looked like, trusting your child completely. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, whispering my late husband's name, hoping I had made the right decision. I had no idea that piece of paper would become the beginning of the loneliest chapter of my life. Because trust, once broken, doesn't just hurt. It destroys the part of you that still believes in family. The change didn't happen overnight. It happened quietly, politely, until I realized I was no longer a guest. I was a burden. At first, living with Daniel and Rebecca felt like a blessing. They set up a small room for me at the end of the hallway. Rebecca even placed fresh curtains on the window. Pale blue, the kind she said reminded her of calm mornings. I told myself I was lucky. Many women my age were alone, forgotten. I had a son who cared. Or so I believed. The first change was subtle. Dinner conversations grew shorter. Daniel stopped asking about my day. When I spoke too long, Rebecca would glance at the clock or clear her throat. I began eating faster, afraid my presence stretched their patience. Then came the rules. "Mom, could you keep the TV volume lower? Mom, maybe don't use the kitchen during Rebecca's Zoom meetings. Mom, the electricity bill is higher this month." Each sentence was soft, respectful, but together they formed a message I couldn't ignore. "You take up space." I tried to make myself invisible. I woke early, cleaned quietly, folded laundry no one asked me to touch. I sat in my room most of the day, listening to the sounds of a home that no longer felt like mine. One afternoon, I overheard Rebecca on the phone. "It's just temporary," she whispered. "Old people get emotional. Once she settles, it'll be easier. Old people. I stood frozen behind the door, my heart pounding like I had been caught doing something wrong simply existing. Daniel used to walk me to the porch when I needed fresh air. Now he handed me my coat without looking up from his phone. When I mentioned my arthritis pain, he suggested I stay active instead of offering help. The hardest part wasn't the coldness, it was the silence. One evening, I asked Daniel if everything was okay. He sighed, long and tired. "Mom, you're overthinking. We're just busy. You have to understand we have our own life. Our own life." As if I wasn't the reason his life ever had a beginning. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow, ashamed of my tears. I reminded myself of the papers I had signed, the house no longer mine, the savings I had handed over for safekeeping. I told myself patience was love. But deep down, a fear I couldn't name began to grow. Because when kindness turns into tolerance, and tolerance turns into resentment, something terrible is always waiting on the other side. And I was about to learn just how thin a mother's place can be in her own child's world. I found out the truth by accident. One envelope, one sentence, and in that moment, my son stopped being my son. It was a rainy Tuesday when everything fell apart. Daniel and Rebecca had gone to work early, and I stayed home alone. My knees ached badly that morning, so I searched for my medical insurance papers. Daniel had insisted on keeping all documents organized in his study. I told myself I was allowed to look. After all, I was his mother. Inside the drawer, beneath neatly stacked files, I found an unfamiliar envelope. My name was printed on it, but the address was "There's not mine." Curious, I opened it slowly, my hands trembling. It was a bank statement. My breath caught. The savings account, my savings, was nearly empty. Money I had set aside over 40 years. Money meant for emergencies, medications, dignity. Withdrawals had been made regularly. Large ones. Transfers I didn't recognize. My vision blurred as I flipped through the pages. Then I saw it. A mortgage approval letter. Daniel and Rebecca had bought a new house. Using my money. I sat down hard on the chair, my chest tightening as if the air had left the room. My ears rang. Every memory rushed at me, working overtime, skipping meals, counting coins at the grocery store so my son could have more. When they came home that evening, I couldn't hold it in. "Daniel," I said quietly, holding the papers, "what is this?" He froze. Rebecca's face went pale for just a second before she recovered. "Mom," Daniel said slowly, "why were you going through our things?" "Our things. Not my savings. Not my future. You used my money," I whispered, "without asking me." Daniel rubbed his forehead, clearly irritated. "We needed it. You weren't using it anyway." I stared at him, unable to recognize the man in front of me. "I trusted you," I said. "That money was for my care." Rebecca crossed her arms. "You live with us, don't you? We take care of you. Isn't that enough?" Enough. As if shelter erased betrayal. As if food replaced respect. That night, Daniel avoided my eyes. No apology came. No explanation. Just silence. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing the truth too late. I had given my son control over my life, and he had used it to secure his comfort, not my safety. Trust doesn't shatter loudly. It breaks in pieces, until you're left holding nothing but regret. And worse than the loss of money was the realization that my son no longer saw me as his mother, only as an expense. The day my son told me to leave, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. That was the part that hurt the most. After I confronted Daniel about the money, the house felt different. He stopped speaking to me unless necessary. Rebecca no longer pretended. Plates slammed. Doors closed harder than before. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. I became a shadow moving quietly through a home that once promised safety. 3 days later, Daniel asked me to sit down at the kitchen table. Rebecca was already there. They had planned this. "Mom," Daniel began, folding his hands like he was in a business meeting. "We've been thinking." My stomach tightened. "This situation isn't working," Rebecca added. "There's too much tension. It's not healthy for anyone." I waited for the part where he reassured me. It never came. "We think it would be best if you found another place," Daniel said calmly. "Something smaller. Maybe assisted living." Assisted living. I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because my heart couldn't process the cruelty. "With what money?" I asked. "You took my savings." Rebecca looked away. "That's not our problem," she said quietly. I turned to my son, searching his face for even a trace of guilt. "Daniel," I whispered, "this is my home." He shook his head. "It's in my name now, Mom. We talked about this." "No, you talked." I trusted. My legs felt weak as I stood up. "I have nowhere to go." Daniel sighed, annoyed. "You can stay with a friend. Or a shelter temporarily. Just not here." A shelter. At 72. That night, I packed my life into 2 suitcases. Clothes worn thin by time. Old photographs. My husband's watch. No one helped me. No one stopped me. Rebecca left an envelope on the dresser. Inside was $200. "Just until you figure things out," she said. I didn't thank her. When Daniel drove me to the bus station the next morning, the silence was unbearable. As I stepped out of the car, I turned back one last time. "Did I fail you as a mother?" I asked. He didn't answer. The bus doors closed behind me. As the city blurred past the window, I realized something devastating. I wasn't grieving the loss of my home. I was grieving the loss of my son, the boy I raised, loved, and believed in. Because some betrayals don't just leave you homeless. They leave you heartless, unless you find the strength to survive what comes next. They thought throwing me away was the end of my story. They were wrong. Because when you abandon a mother, you lose more than you can ever replace. The shelter was quiet at night. Too quiet. I lay on a narrow bed staring at a cracked ceiling, holding my husband's old watch in my palm. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to grieve not just for the son I lost, but for the woman I had been before trust broke me. One morning, a social worker named Helen sat beside me. "You shouldn't be here," she said gently. "There are programs for seniors who've been financially abused." The word abused startled me. I had never thought of myself that way. With Helen's help, I filed a report. Documents were reviewed. Transfers traced. Signatures questioned. The law, unlike my son, did not look away. Months passed. I was moved into a small senior housing apartment. It wasn't the home I lost, but it was warm, quiet, and mine. I planted flowers on the windowsill and began volunteering at the local library, reading to children whose laughter slowly stitched my heart back together. Then the call came. "Daniel." His voice shook. The new house was under investigation. Accounts frozen. Rebecca had left. Lawsuits followed. Promotions disappeared. Friends vanished when comfort turned into consequence. "I didn't know it would go this far," he said. "I just wanted a better life." I closed my eyes. "I gave you my life," I replied softly. "You gave me a bus ticket." Silence filled the line. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. I believed he was. But some apologies arrived too late to unlock what they've destroyed. I didn't yell. I didn't insult him. I simply told him the truth. "You lost your mother the day you chose convenience over conscience." I hung up and cried not from pain, but release. Today, I sit by my window, watching the sun rise over a life rebuilt slowly, honestly. I have less money, fewer possessions, but I have peace. Trust once broken never returns the same, but dignity can. And if my story teaches anything, let it be this: a mother's love is priceless, and when it's betrayed, karma always remembers the cost.